Good evening and welcome to the channel. Tonight we are on day 17 of the U.S. and Israel's war with Iran, and we are witnessing something that nobody in the American foreign policy establishment wanted to admit was possible. The United States of America, the world's most powerful military nation, the self-proclaimed leader of the free world, the country that has anchored the Western alliance for 8 decades, is standing in the middle of the world's most important energy choke point, looking left and looking right, and finding that it is essentially alone. No NATO ally has publicly committed to sending warships to the Strait of Hormuz. Germany has explicitly said NATO should not assume responsibility for the waterway. Japan is citing domestic legal constraints. Australia has said it was not asked and will not be sending ships. France is keeping its vessels in defensive posture in the Eastern Mediterranean. The UK, America's so-called #1 ally, offered aircraft carriers only after Trump had already struck Iran, and Trump told them publicly and with visible fury that he needed those ships before the war, not after it. And China, the country Trump is now openly begging for help, the strategic rival that the entire Trump foreign policy apparatus has spent years describing as America's greatest threat, responded by calling for an immediate ceasefire and offering no warships, no commitments, and no public solidarity with Washington's position. America started this war. America bombed Iran. America asked the world to stand with it. And day 17 is the day the world said no. Let us start with what Trump actually said and what it reveals about where this war stands. In an interview with the Financial Times published on Sunday, Trump made a series of statements that together paint a picture of an administration scrambling for international support it does not have. He said he had asked approximately 7 countries to help secure the Strait of Hormuz and received some positive response, but he declined to name a single one of them. He then issued a direct threat to NATO, saying that if allies failed to assist, it would be very bad for the future of NATO. He targeted the United Kingdom specifically and with real anger. He said the UK is considered America's #1 ally, the longest serving, and when he asked them to come and join the military campaign against Iran, they did not want to come. He said the UK only offered to send 2 ships after the US had, in his words, basically wiped out the danger capacity from Iran. And then he said the sentence that has now been heard in every foreign ministry in Europe: we need these ships before we win, not after we win. I have long said that NATO is a one-way street. Then he turned to China. He said he may delay his planned summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping, which is scheduled for late March in Beijing, unless China helps reopen the Strait of Hormuz. He said it was in China's interest to help because China is heavily reliant on the strait for its energy supply. And he said the U.S. would remember who helped and who did not. Now let us understand exactly how extraordinary this situation is. Donald Trump is threatening his own military alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the single most successful defense pact in human history, in the middle of an active war. He is simultaneously threatening to cancel a summit with China, his main geopolitical rival, while begging that same rival for military assistance. He is publicly naming and shaming the United Kingdom, the country that has stood beside the United States in every major conflict since the First World War, from Normandy to Korea to the Gulf War to Iraq and Afghanistan. And he is doing all of this because the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow 39-kilometer waterway through which 20% of the world's oil supplies pass, is controlled by the country he decided to bomb 17 days ago. This is not just a military problem. It is a strategic failure of historic proportions. The United States launched a war without building the coalition it needed to win the peace that would follow. And now it is trying to build that coalition retroactively, under fire, while oil prices climb above $105 per barrel. And Dubai International Airport is shutting down because Iranian drones are hitting fuel tanks in the world's busiest aviation hub. The responses from the countries Trump named have ranged from polite deflection to outright refusal. Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Vadeful was direct. He said Germany did not see NATO assuming responsibility for the Strait of Hormuz. He said Germany was in favor of sanctions on those responsible for the blockade, meaning Iran. But military involvement was not Germany's position. France has deployed ships to the eastern Mediterranean in a defensive posture and previously raised the prospect of escorting vessels through the strait in the future. But its foreign ministry said those ships would remain defensive and has made no commitment to the Hormuz mission. Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi told Parliament plainly that Japan has not made any decisions about dispatching escort ships, that it is continuing to examine what Japan can do within its legal framework, and that overseas military deployments by Japan are strictly limited by its constitution. She noted the discussion would continue when she visits the White House on Thursday. South Korea said it takes note of Trump's comments and will closely coordinate and carefully review the situation. That is diplomatic language for we are not committing to anything. Australia said it has not been asked to contribute and will not be sending ships. The UK said it is intensively looking at what it can do to help reopen the maritime passage. But British Energy Secretary Ed Miliband told Sky News that the best way to get the strait reopened is to get this conflict to come to an end. In other words, the UK's actual position is that the way to solve the Hormuz problem is to stop the war, not to send warships into it. And then there is China. Beijing's response has been the most diplomatically revealing of all the responses Trump received. China's foreign ministry spokesperson told reporters that China is calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities and urging all parties to avoid further escalation. No mention of warships, no commitment to the naval coalition, no solidarity with Washington's position, just a call for the war to stop. And then separately, a senior Iranian official told CNN that Tehran is weighing whether to allow some vessels to pass through the Strait of Hormuz with one stipulation, that transactions for cargo, including oil, be settled in Chinese yuan rather than US dollars. So China is simultaneously being asked by the United States to join a military coalition to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, while being offered by Iran the economic prize of having its currency replace the dollar as the denomination for oil trade through that same strait. The choice facing Beijing could not be more starkly defined. Join America's military coalition and preserve the existing dollar-based oil trading system that limits China's economic power. Or stay neutral, let Iran's yuan condition take hold, and watch its currency gain a structural foothold in the world's most critical energy choke point at no military cost whatsoever. China has chosen neutrality. It is hard to argue with that choice from Beijing's perspective. A senior Council on Foreign Relations analyst, Edward Fishman, made a point on CNBC on Monday that crystallizes why Trump's coalition-building effort is failing. He said the Trump administration did not consult its allies in Europe or Asia before launching military action against Iran. The countries being asked to send warships to secure the Strait of Hormuz are countries that are far more dependent on Gulf oil imports than the United States is. They are also countries that have been hit with steep tariffs by the Trump administration over the past year. Trump spent his entire first and second terms telling those allies that NATO was a one-way street, that they needed to pay their fair share, that they were free riders on American security. He said publicly that he would let Russia do whatever it wanted to NATO members who did not meet their defense spending obligations. He pulled America back from multilateral commitments and international institutions. He applied tariffs on European goods and South Korean goods and Japanese goods while calling their leaders weak and disrespectful. And now, 17 days into a war he launched without consulting them, a war that has sent their energy costs soaring and their economies toward recession risk. He is demanding that they send their navies into an active combat zone. India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar told the Financial Times that talks with Iran were yielding results after 2 Indian-flagged gas tankers passed through the strait safely. India, which is not part of NATO, not a U.S. treaty ally in the same way, and which has maintained independent diplomatic channels with Tehran, has managed to get its vessels through the strait by talking to Iran directly. That is the result Trump cannot achieve because he is bombing the country he needs to negotiate with. Let us be precise about what the Strait of Hormuz situation actually looks like on the ground today, because Trump's public framing and the reality on the water are significantly different. Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi said, "The strait is open. It is only closed to the tankers and ships belonging to enemies and their allies. Others are free to pass." This is a crucial distinction. The Strait of Hormuz is not physically blockaded in the way that a harbor can be blockaded with ships. Iran does not have a chain across the water. What Iran has done is create a threat environment so severe that commercial shipping companies and their insurers have concluded that transiting the strait is economically unviable. War risk insurance premiums have reached levels that make a single transit more expensive than the profit on the entire cargo. Shipping companies are not being physically stopped. They are choosing not to go because the risk of being hit by an Iranian drone or missile, even if they get through, is priced into their cost model at a level that makes the voyage unprofitable. As one analyst told Al Jazeera, all Iran needs to do is strike occasionally to keep insurers away. Iran does not need to sink every ship. It needs to sink enough ships with enough regularity to make global shipping companies conclude the risk is unacceptable. And it has succeeded at that calculation completely. The IRGC's naval commander, Alireza Tangsiri, said on Sunday that claims by the U.S. about destroying Iran's navy or providing safe escorts for oil tankers were false. He said the Strait of Hormuz has not been militarily blocked and is merely under control. That phrasing, merely under control, is Iran's way of saying that it has established sovereignty over who passes through the strait and on what terms. For Iran, this is not a blockade. It is a checkpoint. And like any checkpoint, it has rules. The rules right now are that enemies and their allies do not pass. Others may negotiate terms, and increasingly, those terms involve Chinese yuan. On the battlefield itself, Day 17 continued the now familiar pattern of escalation with no visible movement toward resolution. Dubai International Airport, the world's busiest international aviation hub in terms of passenger numbers, suspended flights after a drone hit a fuel tank and caused a fire. Emirates Airline was operating a limited schedule. One person was killed in Abu Dhabi when an Iranian missile hit a civilian vehicle. Iran fired missiles at Israeli cities in multiple barrages, with cluster bombs again falling on the streets of Tel Aviv caught on CCTV footage. Israel announced it had begun limited and targeted ground operations in southern Lebanon against Hezbollah strongholds. More than 850 people have now been killed in Lebanon and over 800,000 displaced. Israel's military told CNN it is planning for at least 3 more weeks of airstrikes with thousands of targets still remaining. Trump administration officials said they expect the conflict to end within weeks or sooner, a statement that is entirely inconsistent with Israel's own stated planning horizon. Trump himself said he was not ready to make a deal with Iran because the terms are not good enough yet, and then said the U.S. may hit Karg Island a few more times, just for fun. Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi flatly contradicted Trump's claim that Iran wants a deal, saying his country never asked for a ceasefire and is ready for a long war. The cumulative toll of 17 days of war is now vast. More than 1,200 Iranian civilians confirmed dead by the Iranian Red Crescent. The Henga Organization for Human Rights estimates over 4,400 Iranian military personnel killed. Up to 3.2 million people temporarily displaced inside Iran, at least 850 killed in Lebanon. 13 American service members killed, 2 more from non-combat causes, 140 wounded. Oil at $105 per barrel, up more than 40% since February 28th. American gas prices up 24% in 17 days. The Federal Reserve paralyzed on interest rates because the oil shock threatens to reignite inflation. Dubai airport shutting down, Fujairah oil hub on fire, the S&P 500 down more than 3% for the year. The world's largest emergency oil reserve release has failed to bring prices down, and no country in the world has publicly committed to joining Trump's naval coalition to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. There is one more dimension to today's developments that deserves careful attention, and it is what the Allied response, or rather the absence of it, means for American power going forward. The United States has spent 70 years building the most extensive alliance network in human history. NATO in Europe, security treaties with Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines in Asia, strategic partnerships with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan across the Middle East. This network of alliances has been the force multiplier that made American military and economic dominance possible. No single country could challenge the U.S. because challenging the U.S. meant challenging the entire network. But alliance networks are built on trust, on consultation, on reciprocity. You support my security interests and I support yours. Trump has spent his entire political career treating those alliances as transactions, as arrangements where America was being cheated, as one-way streets that needed to be renegotiated in America's favor. And now, in the moment when he needs those alliances most, in the middle of a war that he launched without consulting a single one of them, he is discovering the logical consequence of that approach. When you tell your allies for years that NATO is a one-way street, do not be surprised when they take you at your word. When you apply tariffs on your allies' goods while demanding their security contributions, do not be surprised when they calculate that they owe you nothing in return. When you launch a war without asking for their counsel and tell them their aircraft carriers are not needed, do not be surprised when those aircraft carriers stay home. The irony of the situation is almost too complete. Trump has built his entire political brand around the idea that America is strong, that America wins, that under his leadership, America would no longer be taken advantage of. And yet, on day 17 of his Iran war, he is reduced to threatening his own alliance system, begging his principal strategic rival for military assistance, and watching the world's most important shipping lane remain closed to American interests while it stays open to Chinese-flagged vessels carrying Iranian oil. The question is no longer whether the world is changing. The question is whether the architects of American foreign policy have understood how much it has already changed. Before I hand it over to you, 3 questions for tonight. Question A, Trump launched this war without consulting NATO allies, applied tariffs on their goods, told them NATO was a one-way street for years, and now demands they send warships into an active war zone. Not a single NATO country has publicly committed to the naval coalition. Do you think NATO as an institution can survive this moment intact? Or is Trump's Iran war the event that finally breaks the alliance that has kept the world from a third world war for 80 years? Question B. Germany says NATO should not police Hormuz. Japan cites legal constraints. Australia says it was not asked and is not going. France stays defensive. The UK offers ships only after the war is nearly won. Every major ally has either refused or deflected. Iran is letting India through because India talked to them directly. What does this tell you about the real balance of diplomatic power in this war and who is actually winning it? And question C, China has been asked by America to join a military coalition to secure the Strait of Hormuz, while simultaneously being offered by Iran the prize of having the yuan replace the dollar in oil trade through that same strait. China has chosen neutrality. Do you think Beijing is playing this perfectly? Or is there a scenario where China's refusal to help comes back to damage its own interests? Drop your answers in the comments below. Share this video if you think people need to understand what America's isolation in this war actually means. Subscribe if you have not already. Stay safe and stay informed, and I will see you on the next one.